Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of the Afghan Eye Podcast. I'm your host, Sangar Paykhar. In today's episode, our esteemed guest is renowned author Scott Horton. He's the director of Scott Horton Academy of Foreign Policy and Freedom, and he's also the director of Libertarian Institute. Scott Horton has authored books such as Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. In 2021, he published Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terror. And he has also edited Hotter Than the Sun, Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. His most recent book is titled Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. Scott Horton is also the host of the Scott Horton Show, a daily podcast. So, Scott, first of all, thank you for being our guest. So glad to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
So, Scott, in recent months, we have had these developments in Afghanistan and Pakistan that are very closely related to the subjects that you have covered in your books. We've seen President Donald Trump repeatedly saying that he wants to gain a foothold in Afghanistan, specifically at the Bagram Air Base. For geostrategical purposes, and we have also seen Pakistani Field Marshal Asim Munir traveling to Washington, D.C., and according to news reports, he has hired D.C. lobbyists to facilitate his relationship with Donald Trump. And we have had this short conflagration between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the tensions are still very high. According to many observers, including our previous guest, the tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan could be best seen as a project that may serve the agenda of Donald Trump. Considering your extensive research on these matters, how do you look at this situation?
I have to tell you, I don't have any information or indication that America is behind the recent conflict, whether they have put pressure on the Pakistani regime to act in any particular way. I'm not saying that that's not true. There's a universe of information out there that is not available to me, and I've been very busy on a lot of big projects and have not been able to even try hard to delve deep into the very recent conflict here. So if there's more to it than what it appears on the face in terms of America or other foreign intervention, playing a hidden hand in the thing, I don't know about that. I do know that, whatever the situation is there, obviously all the people on all sides with power and responsibility are all responsible for their own actions, but everybody's living in a post-America's war in Afghanistan era here. We're now, there are a lot of distortions of power on the ground that remain to be kind of sifted out, probably, right? I know one major conflict of the war, this was actually aside from the Afghan war, was when Barack Obama came in 2009, he ordered the CIA to hunt down and kill the last 29 Arab friends of Osama bin Laden who were still hiding in Pakistan. And that was the drone war that they did. They killed a few thousand innocent people trying to hunt down that last 29. But on top of that, they made a deal with the Pakistani government that they would support the Pakistani government's war against the Tehrik-i Taliban in the Swat Valley and in the federally administered tribal territories there in northwestern Pakistan. And they killed a lot of people and they drove a lot of refugees out of there and into Afghanistan. So while the Afghan Taliban was hiding on the Pakistani side of the border for safe haven and fighting American troops and the Afghan National Army during that time, the actual, I don't know the Afghan National Army, but Afghan intelligence services under the old regime, under the Afghan national government, they were actually backing some of these guys in order to use them, give them safe haven on the Afghan side of the line, in order to use them against the Pakistanis and also to try to use them against the Afghan Taliban. And this group, there's a great article by a guy named Osman Bornan, at afghananalysts.org, where he writes all about this, how this particular group then hoisted the black flag and declared themselves loyal to the Islamic State back in 2013. And this is the group that the Americans now call Islamic State Khorasan, the guys who, it wasn't the Taliban, it was they who did the suicide attack at the Kabul airport gates during the final evacuation in 2021 there. And, you know, once they hoisted the black flag, they declared their independence from the Afghan national government, became their own problem then. Now, I have to tell you, in the time since the American withdrawal, there have been a lot of claims about the new Afghan government, the Taliban new regime there, and their ties to various groups. I really don't know how to measure the truth or falsity of a lot of those claims. For one thing, they claimed that Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of al-Qaeda, was welcomed right back into Kabul as soon as America left, but that then they killed him in a drone strike. I still don't know whether that's verified to be true or not, or whether it was even credibly disputed either. There's just kind of radio silence on that. So I see it said sort of offhand that they've welcomed al-Qaeda back in there, but I haven't seen like actual evidence of here are old Arab friends of Osama bin Laden operating these same kind of networks currently, or the remnants of those same networks. I know that Haqqani and his guys, and that Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and his guys, like they still have, I don't know how independent Hekmatyar is anymore, but Haqqani certainly has his own power structures, independent from the Taliban government and or in alliance with them. But I would, I guess, doubt, without knowing for certain right now, I would doubt under their complete control. I think, you know, he runs his own kind of syndicate there. So there's a lot of power factions, and I think the Taliban, and I know that the Pakistani government has a very hard time controlling all of these armed groups, right? There is not a real monopoly on state power, probably in either of these countries. And I definitely know that to be the case in Pakistan. And if you look at the other side of the line, where there were the recent attacks against Indians in Kashmir, which led to the skirmishes across the Pakistani and Indian border there a few months ago, that all indications that I had seen was that even the Indians didn't think that the Pakistani intelligence services had ordered them to do that. It was just these terrorist groups decided to kill some people because they're terrorists. That's what they do. They're armed mercs. They got nothing else to do. So their only skill. So they go and they fight. And that in this case, it led to a skirmish between nuclear powers because of these groups that, you know, we all know that they're under the control of the ISI, but that's a matter of degrees. They're still human men, not robots. You know what I mean? They still have their own will, and they can still decide to, you know, on one hand, they can obey. On the other hand, they can run wild too. And we've seen that a lot of times. So I would, I guess, really, honestly, if it was up to me, I would just turn the whole rest of this interview around and ask you to fill me in on all of these questions that I've raised that I clearly do not know the answer to.
Actually, what you describe is something that I've always tried to say and convince people, that once you create a organization, a political movement, or even if it's not a political movement, any kind of organization, the more it starts to grow, the more it starts to serve its own self-interest.
That's right.
Whether it's in the public sector, private sector, the idea that you can create an entity and then forever control it as a pawn, especially if it's a human organization, it's just ridiculous. That's not how.
Especially armed mercenaries, right? I mean, they, by definition, can accomplish their own goals, you know?
We see countries like Pakistan, they have historically used the tribal areas, the restive, very underdeveloped, poor regions along the Durand Line. They use these regions for strategic purposes. They armed groups there. They ask those tribal militias in wars against India. Later, during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, that's where all the training camps were based for Afghan resistance movements. So a large section of Pakistan has always been sort of a area where there was no rule of law, and militancy and armed groups were encouraged. But what's so interesting is that right now the Pakistanis are accusing Afghanistan of using the TTP as a proxy, and they're saying basically that India and the Afghan Taliban are in cahoots together against Pakistan, and the TTP, which is a radical Islamist militant movement, is basically a proxy of the Afghan Taliban in India. I find it hard to believe that it's possible that India and the Taliban suddenly join hands and try to wage a war against Pakistan, because I don't see any strategic benefit in that for Afghanistan. Like, Afghanistan is a landlocked country. Afghanistan depends on trade and commerce routes through Pakistan to gain access to the Indian Ocean. Afghanistan is working very hard under this Taliban government to develop ties with Central Asia, with Iran, with India, etc., to facilitate commercial growth where, people have opportunities to work, because the country is very poor. There's a lot of unemployment. The economy, basically, it was like a balloon. It was like literally like a balloon that just evaporated when the Americans left. The economy is very fragile. So this is why security in Afghanistan and commercial trade routes with the neighboring countries are vital. And for this reason, I don't think that this whole accusation of Pakistan, and the reason why they basically want to go to war with Afghanistan, is that you guys are waging a proxy war against Pakistan by using the TTP. And that's why basically they are threatening to invade Afghanistan. They're even currently in Pakistan openly discussing a regime change in Afghanistan.
Good luck. Well, let me ask you, do you think that there is a power behind the TTP?
From a historic perspective, if we look at the tribal areas of Pakistan, these tribal areas have always been areas where there was never a centralized government, never in history.
I'm sorry, let me ask you, the TTP, that is separate from the Tariqi Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban? That's a separate group?
No, it's the same thing. There are a number of Taliban groups in that area. Basically, they are all more or less Taliban, but they carry different names. But essentially, they are all rural Pashtuns from Pakistan who are very conservative, and they believe that they have to have a very strict government in Pakistan, just like Afghanistan. So essentially, they're all Taliban. But what's interesting is that since there was never a centralized government there was never rule of law, there is no development. Even during the British era, roads, railroads, tracks, nothing of sorts was there, no development. So these people have always lived as the backwater, the very underdeveloped part of Pakistan. And the main activity for these people was always being part of some kind of militia, whether it was during the British era to fight against the British, or later they were always used as militias to fight in Kashmir against the Indians. And then later, when the Soviets came, they played a major role supporting the Afghan Mujahideen against the communists. But militancy, no governance, no development, no roads, no job opportunities. That has basically been the standard there. But what happened after 2001, when the Americans invaded Afghanistan, they pushed all these Taliban into Pakistan. And in Pakistan, General Musharraf, he basically had a deal with Bush administration that he would also cooperate against militants in Pakistan, and several military operations happened in the tribal areas of Pakistan, where they killed many local people, and that antagonized a lot of these tribal people and forced them to turn their guns against the Pakistani authorities. So these repeated military campaigns by the Pakistani military has antagonized these people, because on the one hand they said, look, you have always told us pick up guns and go fight in Afghanistan. Now the Americans are there. We want to go and fight, and you're telling us we shouldn't fight? So basically, it was a very confusing situation where they basically used these groups as proxies until they became more or less, how do you say, when you try to charm a snake and then the snake starts to attack you. That's exactly what they did. And the reason why I don't think that the TTP can be just reduced to as a proxy force is if we look at the history, how these groups have emerged and how they have basically turned their guns against the Pakistani military. It's a very complicated matter, but essentially I see this as a blowback.
Sure.
Yes.
Well, so let me ask you then, and I'm sorry, because this is sort of, a little bit of speculation, but where you're saying, like, on one hand, you don't buy it that the Afghan government is making the TTP do this. But then, so would you add to that? Do you suppose that the Pakistani government actually probably secretly agrees with you about that, but that they're using this as a pretext for war against the Taliban in Kabul?
What I believe is that the Pakistani military has always used militant groups as a manageable risk. Like these militant groups, I'll give you a clear example. After 2021, when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, this current military regime in Pakistan that is ruling Pakistan right now, this same regime actually allowed many of these TTP refugees to resettle along the Durand line in those regions. Mm-hmm. This same regime has had many occasions where they negotiated with these groups. The current most deadly faction within the TTP is the Hafiz Gul Bahadur faction. This is the faction that is conducting all these suicide attacks on military bases along the Durand line on the other side in Pakistan, and it's a very deadly group. Hafiz Gul Bahadur was for very long time, for 2 decades, considered good Taliban. He was the Pakistani Taliban who would only focus on attacking on the other side of the Durand line in Afghanistan, and he wasn't active on his own home turf. So he was good Taliban. But due to the Pakistani military's own policies, he became a disgruntled militant that is now focusing on Pakistan. So in my perspective, what is happening is that the Pakistanis think, okay, if there is militancy, if there is some suicide attack or whatever, all these foot soldiers that are dying, well, that's a risk that they are willing to accept, because the bigger game that, this is done my analysis, the bigger game that they're trying to play is to attract the attention of United States and invite the United States to finance another war in Afghanistan, because Pakistan simply doesn't have any alternative than to be a garrison state that is always relying on external financiers to finance them, because the economy in Pakistan is in shambles. All major international corporations that have been investing in Pakistan, they are leaving. Regional actors such as Qatar, they had a major development project in a port to generate electricity with coal. They have announced that they are withdrawing from that project. So there are many indicators that Pakistan is facing major economic challenges right now. And the military simply doesn't have a plan to address economic problems, but also political problems. The most popular prime minister in Pakistan is currently behind bars. The guy who won the elections is behind bars. And they have a alternative that is ruling the government, people who are notoriously corrupt. The new IMF report is saying that Pakistan has gone even worse with regards to its record related to corruption. So I think that a military regime in Pakistan sees no other alternative than to be a mercenary force. And this is why they paid Donald Trump's lobbyists to facilitate that meeting in Washington, D.C. with Shahbaz Sharif and Asim Munir. And this is why I think, for someone who is from the United States, and you have also extensively written about the military-industrial complex in America, and you know the mechanics of how things work in D.C. better than I do. So my question for you is do you see any indication that the current administration in Washington may be interested in financing another war in Afghanistan? Are there any possibilities?
No, sir. I think, they have some pipe dreams about wouldn't it be nice if we could have the Bagram Air Base back? But they don't want to restart the war against the Taliban and put a new sock puppet regime in power in Kabul and fail for another 20 years and leave again. They're not doing that. I think Trump was trying to play hardball with the Taliban and telling them that, don't mess with me. I want my base back. But the thing is about it is the base is ultimately worthless. I mean, they will talk about it as though it gives them a real strategic advantage against Iran or even Russia and China. But the fact of the matter is that we're not going to station nuclear weapons in Afghanistan ever, right? So forget that. Now, and as far as Iran, I mean, we just saw what happened. We didn't even need the Americans to do it. The Israelis had total air dominance over Iran, no problem whatsoever. They didn't even take a shot at our B-2s when America finally flew their B-2s in. And they can fly straight from Missouri to Iran, bomb them, and turn around and fly home again. So we don't need a base in Afghanistan to give us any particular strategic advantage against, because it's just an air base. What are you going to do? You're going to put a giant detachment of armored force that then what, you're going to roll in to invade Persia? Never. That's not happening. We're not putting nukes there or any substantial enough air forces that would make any marginal difference in an actual war against the major powers, Russia or China. So the only actual plausible explanation or, supposed need for American forces to be permanently stationed at Bagram that I've ever heard would be so that in an emergency, they can seize Pakistani nuclear weapons, that they would be able to have special operations forces there that say there's, fighting breaking out between India and Pakistan, and they want to, or worse, I don't know worse, but another scenario, bin Ladenite type jihadis attempting and succeeding in seizing nuclear weapons. And then no way, we're going to send in the SEALs or the Delta Force first, or some Rangers or somebody to go in there and kill the terrorists and prevent them from seizing atom bombs, something like that. But I think even that's not necessary. If you really had to do that, you could do it from the Indian Ocean. And if you really had to do that, it should really be, and I think we already know that for many years, or at least it's how it was in the old days. If they called this program off, I'd be surprised. Years ago, it was reported that the Americans have a program with the Pakistani military where they have crack forces whose only job is protecting those nukes and killing jihadis dead if they come anywhere near them. And so that mechanism is supposed to already be in place, and their nuclear weapons are supposed to be distributed in pieces too, where they don't really even put together a usable warhead until they're already at full absolute threat. Conventional war is already on, and India's arming up and getting ready to blast them. And, only then are they supposed to even put their nukes together in the final stage. So there you go. That's the last, to me, semi-plausible excuse. And then I debunked it as I think not good enough. I mean, and quite frankly, like, to you, my friend, it's the center of the world. To me, Afghanistan is as far away as you could get from anywhere before you're headed back again. So it's just crazy to think that we need our frontier of the American empire to be so far east that it might be so far west that we're not even sure which direction it is to get there from here because it's so damn far away on a big round planet. So I think, all sincere apologies due to the people of Afghanistan and the best of luck to the people of Afghanistan. But America needs to absolutely stay out of there.
The Trump administration has different types of people under their big umbrella. There are people who are strategists like Albert Colby. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work. He is basically a strategist who is behind the whole pivot to Asia thing. He, among others, also advocated against the war in Ukraine, and they said we shouldn't be waging war with Ukraine. We should be worried about China. Mm-hmm. And in Albert Colby's strategy, the book that he has written, I think it's from 2021. Basically, what he says is that the pivot to Asia means we're not going to directly engage any major powers there. We're going to use regional actors against them. Now, I wrote an article in 2024 made a sort of a prediction that if Trump takes over, due to his close ties with India, maybe India will be that regional actor that is going to serve his strategy against China. But I think I made a big mistake because now what we see is that India is more or less turning against Trump, while Pakistan is becoming more closely associated to his policy in South Asia. And some commentators from Pakistan, they say that it could be that Asim Munir, when he was in DC, he told Trump, look, if you want to curb the growth of China as a hegemon in Asia, we can facilitate that by causing trouble over there between Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is also seen as China as its key region for its growth towards, the Central Asia, etc. So for that reason, there is this theory that might be an explanation for why Trump and Pakistan may try to create some kind of instability in the region to limit the growth of China. Mm-hmm. Would you say that there is any truth to that?
Well, okay, if you want to say that it fits with the overall idea of disrupting Central Asia so China can't build their big freeway through there or whatever, then sure, that fits. I'm not going to embellish and tell you that I know that that's what they're doing. I'm sure you could probably find a think tank study where they recommend it. You know what I mean? And maybe Elbridge Colby, I don't know. But you're right in the overall sense that China is the rising regional hegemon. And so their idea is they need to hem them in however best they can. I don't know nearly enough about the leadership in Pakistan now and just how loyal to Langley they are or what. I would have to say, just generally speaking, I would be surprised if the Pakistanis told the Chinese, y'all can go to hell. We're turning west toward the United States of America now. I mean, their job in their precarious position is to split that difference as carefully as they can and stay friends with both. I mean, historically, they're, I don't know how far back we go, but at least in the modern era, they have played an ally with China in hemming in India. And then America, on the other hand, has tried to ally with India in order to hem in China. If all that's about to be turned on its head in a major way, crazier things have happened. I think Trump's real problem, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, man, you're a lot closer than I am to these things. It seems like Trump's only real problem with Modi was he really wanted him to stop buying Russian oil. And so he's saying, look, man, here's all these sanctions, knock it off. And last I read, he got some concessions on that. And the Indians actually did say, okay, fine, we will then. And so, you know, again, the Indians are in the same position as the Pakistanis are as far as China when it comes to Russia. So they've been historically friends with the Russians. They weren't, allies with the Soviet Union, but they were very friendly with the USSR, I think, in most of the post-war era, and have been friendly with Russia ever since then. And while they're willing to ally with America against China, or at least, cozy up to America against China. And of course, the Russians have their own interests in trading with China, but also limiting its influence as well. They own all of Northern Asia, and a lot of that's empty space. And with China to their south, that has 1 billion people in it. And so, they have their own kind of, at least long-term concerns there. So India has to split that difference too. How do we continue to get along with the Russians and the Americans? And after all, Donald Trump wants to get along with Russia. He doesn't really want to fight Russia at all. He's trying right now to figure out a way, if he can, to end the war in Ukraine. And not only that, but truly to re-normalize relations with Russia again and pretend this whole thing never happened, which is heroic, by the way, the most important thing he could possibly do. Now, I don't like the part that it's so that we can join up in picking on China together. And I think, quite frankly, that the fears about the rise of China are overblown. They have plenty of their own problems without trying to seize a bunch of overseas territories where, I guess if they just stole all the minerals in Australia, they could make a lot of money off of that. But they'd have to kill a lot of people and expend it would be a war to conquer Australia and steal all their minerals. And it would be a huge expense, and they would make that up in mineral wealth over a long period of time to make that worth it, and at the cost of ruining their relationship with everybody else in the world. You know what I mean? They're going to roll into Japan and take over Japan and gain what? Some factories and some office buildings and stuff, but at the cost of starting another, major conflict and potentially a thermonuclear war with the United States. Taiwan's one thing, but Taiwan is a special case, and it's part of China. It's a tiny little island right off their coast. That's not the same thing as, and then next they're going to roll on South Korea and Japan and Australia and the rest of our friends in the region. So, I think, if you go back to the beginning of this year when Donald Trump was first inaugurated, before all of his, courtiers started whispering in his ears, he started doing these long form ad lib press conferences in the White House. He's just sitting at the desk in the Oval Office talking to reporters for like 2 hours at a time. I think kind of showing up Joe Biden, because Joe Biden couldn't possibly do that for 20 minutes, right? And so, or 10. So he's just going on and on and on about whatever in the world is on his mind. And at one point he says, you know what, man, instead of pivoting from the Middle East to Russia or to China, what if we just didn't pivot to anyone? What if we just didn't fight anyone? How about we all just make money and get along for the rest of the century? And it's like, yeah, see, that's real, man. That could happen. That's what happens when there's no Bushes or Clintons or Bidens around, is you can have conversations like this. That, wait a minute, what if who gives a damn about China and we can just get along with them and there's no threat at all? And whatever their relationship is with Afghanistan, say they develop a lot of mineral resources. Well, they get the initial benefit of that, but we all get cheaper mineral prices overall. It's, you know what I mean? Capitalism benefits everybody in the end. So let's all participate. Don't globalize the government, but by all means, globalize markets and trade and interconnected relationships between private actors and corporations and people. And you know what I mean? Send sports teams and musical arrangements and whatever. Do everything you can to make everybody friends. There's actually not that much to fight about, mostly because, and look, I mean, there's always going to be mineral wealth to steal and whatever. But in the modern era, just the calculations on paper make it almost always way too costly to launch a war just for theft purposes. You could just make a deal instead and just trade and it'd be fine. Lower your barriers and just figure it out. Now, there's always going to be religion and there's always going to be ethnic controversies and arguments over where borders should be and hard feelings over that one war from 1522 or whatever it is that people still, humanity's humanity and Earth is an imperfect place. So there's going to be conflict. But as far as massive conflicts over resources, at this point, there's just too much at stake. There's too much capital saved up that then has to be completely destroyed over some short-term effort to steal more resources that you could have just bought. So I think overall, humanity's trending toward peace. If we can just get our governments to, roll them back a little bit and let them accept that fact. And quite honestly, Donald Trump is a businessman, but he's not like a real libertarian with like a firm kind of, real free market capitalist, like ideological grounding in peace and non-interventionism. Like if you're familiar with Dr. Ron Paul, the great Texas congressman that ran for president, who's really for non-interventionism and peace. Donald Trump doesn't really know about that kind of stuff or really believe in that kind of stuff. He just looks at it like, hey, why do we got to fight anyway? Which is perfectly pedestrian and perfectly common sense and perfectly correct. That actually, we don't have to fight at all. We don't have to move. Think how crazy this whole conversation is about the middle part of North America's role in pushing its weight around in Afghanistan and Pakistan and India and China over there in South and Eastern Asia to figure out picking winners and losers, starting wars or potentially preventing some or what. It's just nuts. And I don't know that things would be so much better if we just left. But I know that the American managers cannot be trusted to make these decisions. Well, you mentioned Imran Khan in prison. Well, I don't know a whole lot about it, but I have read a couple of pieces that said that, yes, in fact, it was the Americans who leaned on the whichever factions in Pakistan that overthrew him and locked him up after he won fair and square. He's a cricket star. He was a man of the people. It doesn't mean he is perfect on everything, but he told the Americans, no, you can't have a drone base to attack Afghanistan with. And no, I don't want to play all your games and whatever. And the fact that he stood up to them at all, I'm sure he had other enemies in Pakistan anyway. But the Americans sided with them and helped them, or they helped the Americans to get rid of this guy. And, you mentioned blowback. That's the kind of thing where we don't know what all the long-term consequences will be, but we do know that they will be there. We might even be counting them decades from now. You know what happened was once they arrested that Imran Khan, that was what led to the chain of consequences that led to whatever crisis later, where it's just, it'd be almost like me making decisions for your family. You know what I mean? I'm just out of my lane here. This is not my jurisdiction. I'm not informed enough and I don't have the proper authority to call those shots for you. That's it.
You mentioned free markets, trade, and the fact that if people do business, if all sides make a profit, then there is no need for conflict, which is very sensible and logical. And I feel like maybe I'm too much inclined towards that kind of belief system. But I do feel like most people wouldn't really agree with us on this matter, and they would say, no, it's not that easy. Let's just assume that that is a philosophy that may dictate Trump to a certain degree because he's also a businessman. What doesn't make sense to me is we have these assets of the Afghan National Bank that have been frozen by the Americans after they left Afghanistan. And those assets are not released. So Afghanistan is basically also in a sort of an economic chokehold because its banking sector is crippled. And what they do instead is they send a small portion of that money every week to Afghanistan to finance aid organizations in Afghanistan.
Same old racket.
Yes. So, and what happens is that they send that money, which is actually money of Afghan people. They send that money and they pay these aid organizations in Afghanistan. And then you have in Congress and in American media people saying America is financing the Taliban government. It's constantly repeated everywhere. Everywhere is saying this because this is being laundered all over the news that United States is financing the Taliban. What they're actually doing is the assets of the Afghan National Bank is being routed through America to aid organizations in Afghanistan. It's not given to the Taliban. And those aid organizations, every year when I'm in Kabul, when I travel across Afghanistan, if you go to all the 5-star hotels in Kabul, they're all fully booked with these aid organization people, international charities and aid organizations. And they drive around in bulletproof SUVs with security guards, private security organizations, same security organizations that used to work under the other regime during the American occupation. Right. The same business model. And when you look at the news coverage in America, people are saying, oh, it's wrong. America is financing the Taliban. And then you think, what the hell? What are you doing? And how does this even benefit people in America? How does this benefit anyone? Yeah. Because in Afghanistan...
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, first of all, the Taliban are taking their cut. They always have. And America financed the Taliban's war against America for 20 years there, or 15 of the 20 years, right? I mean, that was always a huge racket. There's a whole book about it by a guy named Douglas Wissing. I'm sorry, it's right on the tip of my tongue, the title of the book. But Douglas Wissing is the guy's name. And I'm sure that they're absolutely still taking their cut. But you see that politically from the American side, if they just release all that money and give it to the Taliban regime, well, dollars are fungible, and that money will quite literally be going to fund the Taliban's army driving around in American Humvees after we lost that war, left all our equipment in the hands of the Afghan National Army that immediately turned around and handed it to the Taliban. So it's the worst thing that anything can be to people in Washington, and that is embarrassing, right? None of them can ever be held accountable for anything that they do. But they might look bad. And quite frankly, like, just pretend you're in the U.S. for one moment. Think about how bad it looks. And yeah, we're just going to give hundreds of millions or billions of dollars straight to the Taliban. It doesn't matter that it's Afghanistan's money. The headline in the Washington everything is America gives billions of dollars to the Taliban. Well, at the same time, the Taliban, like, they're not the nicest of guys. And they are very good friends. Like, they killed our guys, defeated our guys, and they're friends with guys even who suicide bombed our guys and like all of these things. So like, you know, you'll never hear from me that we should be permanent enemies with these guys or anything like that. But I definitely don't want to put them on welfare. I definitely don't want to like invite them to the Oval Office and like make them our very best friends. You know what I mean? Should we tolerate that the fact that we lost that war to these guys? Sorry, Charlie, those are the rules. But the Americans are in a very difficult place if they're just going to give the money. And then, like you're saying, the only thing that they can even do politically to even make it possible at all is to give it to these organizations who promise to spend it on themselves and also some aid to Afghans, right? Like that's basically the only way that they can even get away with giving any of the money back at all, right? Like, I'm not telling you to be grateful. I'm just telling you that's the best you're ever going to get. There's no political way to make it realistic to say like, okay, fine, go ahead and take this money. We trust you that you'll spend it all on planting seeds and grow wheat to feed your people soon. Because that's not how business is done over there. And nobody thinks that it is, you know?
You're familiar with the Hudson Institute?
Yes.
So the Hudson Institute, since 2021, they have had a number of sort of seminars, conferences with these anti-Taliban groups. Mm-hmm. And
since 21, you say? Since the withdrawal in 21?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
And in one of their events, they said, you know, these assets of the Afghan central bank that are in our possession, we should take that money and give it to these anti-Taliban groups that are willing to wage another civil war in Afghanistan. And the Hudson Institute has repeatedly held events or has published articles where they basically advocate for that. And they're saying essentially that that money should be used for another war in Afghanistan.
I don't think you need to worry about that, buddy. Here's why. You know what? There's, the Taliban, when they took over the country, they were very smart in the last few years there. Where this was not just like, a couple of Pashtun tribes. And they're obviously in the lead. But they went around to especially the Tajiks and the Uzbeks in the north and said, look, man, you guys believe in God. You're joining our group and you don't really have a choice. Welcome to our ranks, pal. And they said, okay, fine. Right. As they put it in the American press, they would say the Taliban own half the country in the daytime and they own 75% of it at night. Right. And that was how it went for the last quite a few years of the war, where they were not being ethnic exclusivists at all. And I don't know as much about the deals that they made with the Hazaras. I know that there was footage right at the end of 22, maybe in August of 22, of some Pashtun Taliban leaders meeting with a group of Hazaras and essentially telling them, welcome to the New World Order, pal. We're back in charge and you guys are going to suck it up. And what were they going to do about it? They were in no position to fight. Like, what are they going to do? America's going to team up with the Ayatollah in Iran to arm up a bunch of Shiite mujahideen to take on the Taliban in the middle of Afghanistan? Not in any world that we live in. It's just not going to happen, right? And so the Taliban, their victory, it's a big country. I know it's the size of Texas, which is huge because I'm from here. It's a very big country. Parts of it are very lawless. There are very high mountains and very deep valleys and very harsh deserts and huge like rural areas where it's just all farmers, for hundreds of miles in every direction and whatever. So this can be a very difficult land for them to have a true monopoly on force there, the Taliban, to really rule it. But if anyone's got a shot, it's them. And I don't know of any from all my study of the war for the 20 years we're over there. I can't conceive of what group of armed kooks they think that they could arm now to launch an insurgency now. You might remember when Kabul was being taken, they said, well, we're going to get Shah Massoud's son to go and fight way up there in Mazar-e Sharif or whatever. They gave that up in 2 days. That was just not even a thing. The Taliban walked over there and they're like, yeah, right. Give me your rifle, son. And he was like, that's it. They're bluff called. There was nothing that they could do. So, perhaps things have changed over there, but I think the Hudson Institute, they're just smoking crack over there because they like the flavor. I don't know what they're talking about.
Organizations like the Hudson Institute, if we look at their funding, they are primarily funded by the military-industrial complex. So it makes sense that they would argue for anything that promotes more war, more conflict. But last point that I would like to get your perspective on is, let's just say we see an increase in trade and commerce, especially now with Central Asia, that is basically building railroads in Afghanistan. Russia and Central Asian republics, they have basically said that we will build the railroads in Afghanistan that will connect Afghanistan with Iran, Pakistan, etc. if things turn out for better between Afghanistan and Pakistan. But those projects are currently underway. It's still not very clear when these projects will be exactly completed, but they have actually started doing that. So we see a new reality in Central Asia where, regardless of the fact that the Taliban are recognized or not, there is a lot of investment being done in Afghanistan. And this investment is because, to put it very simple, it benefits the neighboring country. They see their profit, their benefit in that. However, they're still very cautious. While they're investing lots of money in building railroads in Afghanistan, they still won't recognize the government because that would upset America. Now, how would you predict the near future? If this current situation continues, will the American stance, especially with regards to what you said earlier, these people killed our people, they conducted suicide attacks, etc. Politically, it doesn't look good if we give them any money. But with regards to recognition and moving on with our lives and just trying to focus on economic development, as Taliban continuously say, will there be any kind of change in near future?
Probably not, just because the headline, America officially recognizes Taliban and shakes their hands and all that, looks bad. I would just say, you know what? Be careful what you wish for. How about we just leave you alone and ignore you and let everybody be happy about that? What you're talking about here is not America building railroads across there. They wouldn't dare. What a waste of money that would be. And what you're talking about now is that what you're really saying is that you're describing a vote of confidence by Moscow and Beijing, that they think that the Taliban have a secure enough security situation now that they would be what in any other time would be considered crazy enough to try to build a railroad across Afghanistan. And this is the same for all the mining operations. You know, David Petraeus in 2010, he says there's $1 trillion worth of minerals. Oh, that's why we're at war there, so we can murder these people and steal their treasure? What? Is that what they said the war was about? And then, but the thing is only a damn fool would think that in the middle of America's war that you could have mining operations that require investments of tens of billions of dollars, and including the, massive oversized dump trucks and the massive rail lines. And then where are you going to, build a big railroad through the Khyber Pass and then down to the port of Karachi? Is that what you're going to do? And or the railroad's going to go where? West through Iran and Iraq to our friends in Jordan or something what's the plan? The Chinese and the Russians, they can do it. They're adjacent. You know what I mean? Or Russia's near adjacent, at least. China is by way of the what you call corridor there in the Northeast. Wukan corridor, however you say it. So, and look, I mean, this is the thing where you said, and I get it. The evil right-wing capitalists rule the world, so everybody who's the opposite of that thinks they're some kind of leftist or whatever. But the thing is ask yourself the honest truth about China, as you're describing. They're investing in Afghan mineral wealth and developing resources there. They have not sent the People's Liberation Army to occupy the place and kill people and steal that wealth. They are shaking hands and passing out briefcases full of cash. They're saying, we want to buy your mineral wealth. Well, guess who'd lose, at least for a while, in a war between Afghanistan and China? Afghanistan would. That's who. And then you'd kick their ass after 20 years and they'd have to turn around and leave again. But they're not doing that. People are not being killed. They're just digging the treasure out of the ground. And why? For profit. Because they think that if they invest this much money, that they'll be able to extract that much money. And so it's worth it. That's why. Capitalism, trade, freedom across borders between nation states. It's not a religious faith. That's how the world does work and needs to work. And when that breaks down is much of the time where the fighting comes from. I'm not saying that was the origin of America's war here, but it's the origin of a lot of disputes around a lot of borders. And would anybody prefer that Afghanistan was at war with China right now, or that everybody figures out a way to trade and shake hands and make money together? And from here, I'm happy for Afghanistan, the people and the land and the culture and the society and whoever, and the Chinese and the Uzbeks and the Tajiks and the Turkmen and whoever over there. If you guys can build some railroads and spread peace and commerce and prosperity, then that's the hope for all mankind. I'm not jealous and I'm not mad, and I don't want America to bomb your railroad and prevent you from doing good because that somehow helps me do better. That's not really right. What we need is, even if it's, say, for example, doesn't pertain directly to Afghanistan, but it comes to mind that I'm from Texas. We have Texas natural gas companies who like to liquefy that natural gas and sell it to Germany. Well, if Germany is buying their natural gas from Russia, then they're buying less from Texas, right? But my thing is, I don't care about that. One, because I don't own a Texas natural gas company. And two, just because I'm looking at it from a broader perspective. I like it when Russia and Germany trade. I like it a lot better than when Russia and Germany fight. The last time Russia and Germany fought, it was the worst thing that ever happened. And the time before that, it was the worst thing that had ever happened. And so we want them to trade. We want for the Germans to be dependent on that gas, and we want the Russians to be dependent on those euros so that they don't kill each other. Because that's the worst thing that can happen, not losing money, war, which also costs a lot of money, right? So, that's the thing. Forget all this Marxist crap. What people need is private property rights and free exchange.
From the last 2-3 decades, what mainly has happened in Afghanistan is that people have associated Afghanistan primarily with militancy, war, conflict, and etc. But what a lot of people don't know, like for example, I live here in the Netherlands, right? And here in the Netherlands, almost every mobile phone repair shop is owned by Afghans. All the spare parts for mobile phones and everything in Europe, the trade is dominated by Afghans. If you go to Dubai, to Abu Dhabi, in the Gulf regions, there are a lot of businesses, a lot of business people are from Afghanistan. In Pakistan, they're deporting over 3 million people out of, that's a separate issue, but in Pakistan, a lot of business is done by Afghans. There are a lot of people from Afghanistan who, culturally, traditionally, Afghans have always been people who are very good at commerce, trade. And this is something that is very little known around the world. People don't discuss it, but Afghans are very good at doing business with people. And the thing that you were just saying right now earlier, that, instead of war, what we need is for people to do business with each other. Because if we all make profit, there's no need to wage wars and have conflicts with each other. And I think it perfectly aligns with a very dominant philosophy in Afghan society. It's not religious, it's not political, it's just the way people are there. And the fact that, these very unfortunate almost 5 decades of instability have prevented people in Afghanistan from flourishing that's very unfortunate. But at the same time, I think, now that there is some sort of stability, what you just earlier said, this is what we all need to adopt, whether it's in Afghanistan or in America with their entanglement with Venezuela, with Ukraine, and even maybe Nigeria most recently. I think, it sort of aligns with what you're saying, and I am really happy to have you on our show today, hearing your perspective after reading your books. By the way, just before one question: when did you actually start getting involved in antiwar.com? What year was that?
Okay, so I first started interviewing their guys in 2003, right at the start of the Iraq War. So the troops really, I think they tore down the statue. The Marines tore down the statue of Saddam Hussein on April the 9th. And my first interview I had been doing radio and I had opposed the war before that. But my first interview on my interview show was on April the 12th, 2003. And that was Alan Bach from antiwar.com. And that was, the first weekend of the fall of Baghdad. and people can check the record. We were both really great on it. And so, yeah. And then, I'm interested in libertarianism and freedom overall. But foreign policy is the thing where I guess it's the thing that makes me the maddest. It's where the lies are the worst and the violence is the worst and the waste is the worst. And as far away as it all is, it's the stuff that I tend to take most personal. And I know a lot of people who've been to war and back and all of that. And so I kind of carry a grudge on their behalf as well. And, I ain't that smart, but I could see how we could have been living a very different and much better last 35 or 40 years instead of the way we've done it since the end of the Cold War. It's just, we've had very irresponsible men in power, very ignorant and irresponsible men, and they've just made all the wrong damn decisions. But it could have been much different. So, and then I'm lucky in that sense that, it gets to a point, whether it's the Afghan war, the Iraq war, whatever, where I just covered them all, enough in a row that I thought, all right, at some point I actually do have a comparative advantage here where I'm going to be able to tell this story and not necessarily better, but from beginning to end in a more comprehensive way. Like if you ask me about Somalia, I'll start in 90 and end in 07 or whatever, Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I read your work, obviously, before you published A Fool's Errand. I knew about your work. I was reading Anti-War 2004, 5, 6. I would always read those websites that have a very critical perspective on war in Afghanistan and Iraq. But actually, I've had a number of speaking engagements here in the Netherlands where they asked me, okay, if we want to learn more about Afghanistan, which books do you recommend? I would recommend your book.
Really?
Really. I'm not exaggerating, really, okay? The Afghanistan Papers.
Mm-hmm.
There is this book by Carter Malkasian. I think it's called The War in Afghanistan or The American War in Afghanistan, something like that. But there are a number of books that I would always recommend, and I would recommend your book because, you see, there are many authors who have written about Afghanistan because they have traveled to Afghanistan or they had some kind of role in the military or as a diplomat or whatever. But what strikes me is that your work was so based on documented publications that everyone can just go and verify for themselves. Like, this actually happened, this was reported, this was said there, this was said there. And this is why it makes that particular book, A Fool's Errand, such an important document that covers the American war in Afghanistan. And for that reason, I was saying, like, I'm very happy to have you here on our show because I think, a lot of people have benefited from that book. I personally did. And I also recommend that book because I think, these conflicts are often told from a particular lens and perspective. And it's always refreshing to have this perspective on a conflict that is very critical of the fact that war is essentially a racket. Like the amount of corruption that happened, all the embezzlement that happened with the war in Afghanistan, how you have documented that in that book. A lot of people refer to the Afghanistan Papers as the gold standard of exposing corruption in Afghanistan. And I often say, yes, but you also have to read Scott Horton's book as well, because it's not that popular as the Afghanistan Papers, but it's still it's a very good documentation of a lot of embezzlement and corruption and all kinds of shady deals that happened. So that's why thank you for actually doing that work. Like, it was essential. I think it had a huge impact on a lot of people who came to the conclusion that this war is going nowhere. It's not benefiting anyone. So I think you played a major role in convincing a lot of people.
Wow, great. Well, thank you very much for saying that. That's really nice of you to say, and I really appreciate that a lot. I'll tell you a funny story. the other Scott Horton, as I affectionately call him, the professor at Columbia University and writer at Harper's Magazine. He's actually an international human rights lawyer. And he actually had a gig advising Ashraf Ghani, the sock puppet president of Afghanistan. And when my book came out, he got called into Ghani's office. What is the meaning of this? And had to explain it's not me. It's this kid from Texas is always speaking in my name. But I thought that was a good one. But thank you for saying that. I'm glad you got something out of it. It's really nice to hear. I didn't go there. You're right. And I hope that would be my advantage, is that unlike someone who could tell you firsthand, I know because I was there, I can't do that. But what I can tell you is a lot of things, right? Instead of a lot about one or two things. And so I'll try to take you through and show you a whole kind of overview. But I am just a radio show host from Texas, right? I've never been even to the old world at all, much less to Afghanistan. So to have an actual Afghan tell me, yeah, I read this Texan's book and it stands up, that means a lot. That's really great.
Thank you very much again for being my guest. And I hope to speak to you again. Who knows?
Sure.
And for people who would like to get in touch with you and learn more about your work, about what you do, about libertarianism, what is the best way for them to reach out?
Well, I'll make this simple for you, okay? First of all, go to the Scott Horton Academy. If you want to know what I know, go to scotthortonacademy.com and sign up for my massive new project there. Otherwise, just check me out on X, Twitter. It's just x.com/Scott Horton Show. And then my bio is just nothing but links to all of my various projects. The Institute, antiwar.com, and my various shows and everything else is all right there on my X account. And I'd very much like to interview you on my show about what's going on in Afghanistan now. If that's okay, maybe we'll talk next week.
Anytime. For you, anytime.
Great.
Okay. To our audience, thank you all for tuning in, and thank you for joining us. For those of you who would like to support our work, please visit our Patreon page and PayPal page. And if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, make sure that you subscribe. Please send your feedback, suggestions, comments to info@afghaneye.net. I'm sorry, it's afghaneye.net. Until the next episode, take care of yourself and each other. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.